Well, I bought a bowl of one-ton noodle soup, wall one-ton. So it has a little bit of everything. It has a little chicken, a little bok choy, mushrooms, shrimp. So all my favorite items all thrown into one. And I picked this because it reminds me of my mom. She just loved to sit around the table and get us the family together and, just to talk. That was her excuse to get the family together, always to invite us to lunch, always to invite us to dinner, constantly.
Yep. So for me, I bought a bowl of Shin Ramen. It's my favorite brand. I usually add an egg, some bok choy. I just didn't have the time today, but kind of spice it up a little bit. And for me, it's kind of like a similar story to Randall, but I just remember growing up, actually just coming home from practice, and then my parents were just a little bit too tired to cook anything, so we just all eat over instant noodles and share some conversation, talk about our days. So I think it's just really just the memories and the nostalgia of childhood and sharing that time with family is what these noodles remind me of.
I wanted to show a different light. So we tried to focus on Asian Americans who were role models, who were basically breaking stereotypes. And on the second front, we wanted to have a daily news site because Asian America was missing a site where you could follow Asian American news on a daily basis. So from the very beginning, we were 365 days a year, and we have not deviated from that. So I think that's very important to our origin as well.
I wanted to create to kind of celebrate the shared cultural experiences of the younger generation, so Gen Z, millennial Asians, both in America and also around the world. And I think my goal was to really create a space where Asians weren't just on the sidelines, where stories weren't just kind of, pushed aside, but where they were the center of the conversation. And growing up, I grew up in a neighborhood where I was really just one of 3 Asian Americans in the entire school district. So a lot of times I often felt alienated from my Asian identity. Outside of my parents, there really weren't many opportunities for me to connect with others who shared my culture, who shared my ethnic background. So that was something that, as I kind of got older and I, started meeting other people, I realized how important it was to kind of meet those other people like me. And my goal was to create a digital space that I feel like I would have benefited from growing up, where stories that were important to me were the sole focus, and where I could also connect with others who shared similar cultural experiences.
One of our custom research projects found that with certain shows where there was diverse representation, both in front of and behind the scenes, right, there was more of that audience group that was coming to the show, which makes sense. We want to see more of what's familiar and more of what's authentic. I think the authenticity is also critical, which is why having the talent that is at AANHPI makes a big difference, right? What about in terms of why is it important then that diverse media as a whole, right, is present within the media marketing / advertising industry?
I think, to your point, I think it's incredibly important for diverse media to be well represented, because there are just so many diverse community-centric stories to be told. And the only way I feel to really tell these stories in an authentic manner is to have them be told directly by members of the community, like you mentioned, both in front of the camera, but also behind the camera as well. I think it's super important, just because, there are so many cultural nuances and contextual clues that I think are important. And, audiences these days, like, I feel they can really tell when something is just, superficial versus something that is truly authentic, and it's really a project designed to forward and advance the community. And, especially like this younger generation growing up, I think, there are also just so many independent content creators as well that are coming out and emerging, creating amazing content that really not resonates just with their own individual community, but the community, the broader community at large. And I think that's super important, and is really a trend that I think will continue, and really kind of advance the representation, not only in some of the larger box office projects, but also just grassroots independent creators as well.
Well, I think the smart brands realized that they can't continue to be doing what they've been doing, that they need to expand their reach, they need to expand, their customer base, and they need to cater to the different cultural influences and recognize that this is not a monolithic society anymore. This is a multicultural society.
Authentic messaging really is important, because I think, like I said before, consumers can tell when brands are just being inauthentic, or when they're just kind of, doing things to just check off a box. And I think it's really important to have authentic outlets creating authentic content. I think that's the only way to do so. And for advertisers to want to connect with those audiences, I think it's extremely important, specifically for Asian Americans, and to diversify their marketing budgets to actually allocate some of that budget for those audiences. But kind of touching upon Randall's previous point, Asian content nowadays, especially over this past year, I think it's incredible where it's not just Asians or Asian Americans consuming that content. There are just so many instances where K-pop, BTS, Blackpink, obviously Squid Game, Korean dramas, and as well as other Asian entertainment groups. It's just amazing in terms of how widespread it's become, where it's not just Asian Americans, it's not just African Americans, it's really everybody is kind of engaging as a whole in these stories that are inherently culturally Asian based.